Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the New Age magazine, predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. On this podcast, we take a deep dive into the articles of the history, people, and lessons of Freemasonry, as written in the New Age magazine, and their pertinence to both everyday personal and Masonic life. Hosted by brothers Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree, and Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH. Articles from the New Age magazine read by Matt Bowers and brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World.
Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast. I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, along with Brother Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH, historian for the Valley of Washington, D.C., and Matt Bowers, now 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. He just became Master of the Royal Secret a couple of weeks ago, so congrats to Brother Matt on that. In this podcast, what we do is we take an article from the New Age magazine, which was the predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. We dust it off. Brother Chris has digitized all of those, and we're going to have Brother Matt read it for us, just like he does with the Scottish Rite Journal podcast. And then we're going to talk about it because these things have been around in some cases for 40, 50, 60 years, some even longer. And this one today, Philosophy and the Drama in Freemasonry by Brother Francis H.E. O'Donnell, 32nd degree KCCH. Brother Chris, do you know when this one, what era we're looking at here on this one?
This is part of that first couple of years of the of the magazine.
So we're talking what, 1900s, the aughts, or
1904, 1905.
So that's what the era we're looking at.
Yeah.
And at that point, I guess what this is one of the things that this touches on a little bit is how degree work is done, because at that point, A lot of Scottish Rite cathedrals were starting to be built, historically speaking. And so you're going from performing degree work in a traditional lodge room setting to a stage type setting, which was a sea change.
I'm so glad you hit it right on the nail. So in order to just make this a little easier for people, because it is kind of dense, there's a lot, especially in the beginning. It's not a quick read.
It is not.
There's a lot in there. I sort of boiled it down to 3 points, which is O'Donnell says sight and sound are important. It's important to the initiatic process. It's important to the entire thing. So sight and sound are important, but it comes from this, primitive, grand scheme of there's a religious, connection to it. The second part is the people that are conferring the degree or the initiation, the practitioners, he calls it. The practitioners are super critical to this. So it's not just, hey, we want to make sure that your degree work is spot on. It's not going to be like word letter perfect, but the practitioner has to really understand the values, really understand what's going on, understand the degree to make it a better degree, right? And then the third part is, resources, the space that you do it, the money that you have to do these things, to perform these degrees or conferrals. Yeah, it's important, but it's not the be all end all, And so those are the sort of the three spots, the three themes that I pulled sort of high level. So maybe let's have Matt go through it, and then we can jump back in and talk about that more.
Absolutely. Let's dive into this one. Again, the title of this is Philosophy and the Drama in Freemasonry by Brother Francis H.E. O'Donnell, 32nd degree KCCH, from around 1904, 1905 in the Scottish Rite New Age magazine, as read by Brother Matt Bowers, 32nd degree.
Philosophy and the Drama in Freemasonry. Man is a trinity, individually and collectively. Individually, he is spirit, mind, body. Collectively, the family, the nation, humanity. The immortality of man is a Masonic axiom. No atheist can ever be made a Mason. The emphasis of the Trinitarian character of man is requisite to a correct comprehension of the relative values of the philosophical inculcation and dramatic rendition of the several degrees of Freemasonry. The breath of life vouchsafed to some, not all, newborn babes, endows the infant with the consciousness of its own personality, and stamps it with the immortality of a separate identity in the cosmos of created things. The consciousness or mind is given the same attribute as the physical form, to wit, the power to grow. The thought, or activity of the mind, is stimulated by the physical senses, and they in turn depend upon corporeal action for their education. The consciousness of identity, being essentially divine in origin, repels by the action of conscience the grosser thoughts of the physical entity, and accepts and feeds solely upon the higher, finer mental pabulum called wisdom. Thus proceeds the soul growth or evolution of the immortal spirit in man. The physical, mental, and immortal parts, interdependent upon each other to constitute the personality of the perfect man, progress through the aeons of eternity to a part in the greater good, for thus, evolutionary, progressively, through his own emanations of the life principle, even God grows. The principle established that education, through the physical sense, pours into the electrolytic trough of mind, and that the battery plates of soul attract only the gold of wisdom to beautify and enrich the immortal spirit of man. We are now ready to consider the ways and means to fulfill the Masonic obligation, to aid the development of the divinity in humanity. The child first comes from the darkness of unconscious existence to the light of immortal conscious identity through the sense of sight. There are the abnormalities of the congenital blind, but the discussion of that condition is not pertinent to the present subject. The evolution of species proves the force of majority rule in nature equally as in nations. The crude impressions of infancy are received mostly via the eye. Time and patience gradually add the power of the ear. Hearing does much to originate and accelerate the development of the higher thought processes. Blind philosophers have been too numerous to name, whilst the exception of the semi-mute Dr. Kiddo, they are practically unknown amongst the congenital deaf. The mind of the child, the savage, and the ignorant everywhere is best reached through the sense of sight. But after the first stages of education are passed and the mental pictures taken by the eye are ready to be developed, printed, and enlarged, the ear becomes more attentive, and greater strength is added to the knowledge which passes into the chambers of the mind. Reason begins more to take the place of mere impression. Scenic perfection is not the ultima thule of dramatic art. The stage effects give a visionary pleasure to the greater mental charm produced by the efforts of the ideal actor. Theatrical surroundings are but more or less crude attempts to depict striking phases of human activity. They are wholly artificial. A Midsummer Night's Dream is best rendered in a natural woodland. No stage setting can render truly the scenes of Shakespearean or other historical dramas. The genius of the great artist palls before the ability of the perfect impersonator. It is the statue versus the living form. Tableaux make striking impressions but are always open to misinterpretations. The oratory of the Grecian philosophers ranked far ahead of the art of the Greek actors, or the spectacles of the Olympian Games. The philosophy has lived, for it appertained to the immortal part of man, whilst the theaters are in ruins, and the games are almost forgotten. The theaters and the games were the recreations of the mental and physical temporality of the Greeks. They served a purpose and passed away. Their existence was not useless. They fulfilled a certain work in the education of their age, just as the drama and athletics of the 20th century have their proper place in the curriculum of modern life. Freemasonry is a philosophical fraternity. The endeavors of so-called reconstructors to convert the order into an eleemosynary, almsgiving, beneficiary society, and in some countries to endow it with a political purpose, are gross violations of the genuine spirit of the ancient institution. As a philosophical school, Masonry is educational at the ultra-highest degree. It is not a primary, grammar, or high school of ethics, but the ne plus ultra college of the greatest culture known to man. The mission of Freemasonry is to down the demons of superstition that false education systems have created to enslave the body, mind, and soul of man. Masonry is iconoclastic of evil, but the divine architect of good. Masonry aims to make man fit finally to become a perfect part in the universe of God. The great object of the order, set forth clearly in every degree from the entered apprentice to the prince of the royal secret, demands the assiduous devotion and attention of every earnest Freemason. A dramatic presentation of the lessons of the degrees is permissible and preferable solely when the teachers are so impressed with the divinity of their purpose as to feel the inspiration always divinely vouchsafed if sincerely asked for such a moment. Every thought of self must be eliminated from their efforts. The Masonic instructor, who poses with platitudes and stained-glass attitudes principally to gain the applause of his brethren, will never create a favorable impression upon intelligent novitiates. It is a crime against Masonry to willfully initiate other than deserving men of superior mind and mold of life. Freemasonry works to create an army of exemplars, not actors, soldiers of the light, who by their everyday bearing in business, society, and the family unostentatiously depict the glory of the better life, the moral manhood amongst men. If Masonic work is to degenerate into miserable dramatic misrepresentations of divine truths, enacted by self-conscious imitators of histrionic art, then away with such trumpery. The attentive ear can listen and learn, always, everywhere, to the instructive tongue. The glory of celestial being is as interesting and recognizable to the anxious, eager seeker after truth, when communicated in the darkest recesses of a mountain cave, as when surrounded by all the scenic effects and pictures of the finest Scottish Rite Cathedral. To make a great Mason, otherwise a truly good man, but three things are absolutely requisite: a reasoning, intelligent mind, a ready receptive ear, and a patient, faithful, capable instructor. All else is but flounces. They may add ornament, but do not enhance either the quality or utility of that spotless robe of whitest floss, Freemasonry. There is no intention to decry the dramatic presentation of realistic features of the degrees, but rather to give a forward lest the philosophies of the ancient mysteries be subordinated to spectacular display. The 3rd, 6th, 9th, 15th, 16th, 21st, 27th, and 29th degrees are traditionally historically open to theatrical rendition. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd largely, and all the others are absolutely philosophical. Elegantly prepared tableau and scenic effects may serve to impress striking truths upon minds of coarser fiber, but the truth itself, burned in by the inspired words of the faithful teacher, is what will ever most appeal to the finer mentality of the earnest seeker for the light. Idolatry and superstition follow quickly in the wake of ultra-realistic display. Wycliffe, Knox, Luther, and company had to overturn the elaborate imagery upbuilded by a despotic priesthood to uncover the great light of liberty. Call it religious liberty, but religious liberty and human liberty are synonymous. Religion is the bringing back to the law, and the law, the one true law, not license, is always true liberty. It is nonsensical to talk of the mob man, the ordinary unit of the mass called mankind, being able to distinguish the symbol from the thing symbolized. He doesn't do it. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't be the mob man if he could. Liberty can only offer opportunity. It cannot compel its acceptance. Hence the ignorant are enslaved everywhere, even in the land of the freest of the free. The mission of Freemasonry is to liberate from mental thraldom the minds of those who accept the opportunity and win the right to be called free men. No series of theatrical performances could convey aright all the lessons of the mighty past necessary to a true comprehension of the lives of our ancestors. A correct understanding of the relationships of bygone events in history can be attained only in the sanctum sanctorum of the student's den. The cultivation of analytical thought needs the patient assiduity of the bookman. The superb imitation of the apparel and the costly reproduction in tinsel of the surroundings unquestionably present striking pictures of never-to-be-forgotten events of the past. Capable actors, to a limited degree, resurrect for a brief period the characters who figured in those ancient scenes, yet the whole is but a passing show, almost forgotten when the curtain falls. the effects produced upon the minds of the audience have not the durability of the lessons inculcated by the professor from the rostrum of the forum. Fine acting is a high art productive of pleasing but evanescent results. Teaching, true instruction, is the outpouring of soul force. It impregnates the very being of the pupil and never fails to add, at least, a modicum of increase to his spiritual power. The profanes who become Freemasons are supposed to become better men, not for a moment but for all eternity. Therefore, it is the paramount province of Masons to teach wisdom rather than to exemplify dramatic art. The fulfillment of this end will ever demand the preferment of a philosophical presentation of the degrees. The dramatical rendition, no matter how excellently enacted, must always be kept subordinate to the greater purpose. The creation of the moral man, of one more soldier of the truth, is of vastly more importance than the production of a first-class mimic. Galileo and Goethe did more for the evolution of the human intellect than 10,000 Grimaldis. Plato lives, whilst the god Pan would be forgotten were it not for his pipes. There is a happy medium is everything. The picture, living upon the stage or painted upon the wall, is a useful accessory, but not an indispensable adjunct to education. The dramatic representation of some degrees is extremely desirable when well done, but the philosophical significance must not be left to the imagination of the candidate. The picture is the platter, the philosophy is the provender of the feast of initiation into the ancient mysteries. The soul can live forever without a plate but perishes without the sustenance of the spiritual food. Gaudiness is not godliness. The super-excellent vanities of a pontifical high mass in St. Peter's at Rome, though constantly repeated through the centuries of the Christian era, have not elevated the host, the mass, the mob of Italian citizens to a moral plane superior to the heretics without the pales of the Roman Catholic communion. To the contrary, it has degraded them in the scale of civilized nations. Italian Freemasonry, working secretly, so secretly, in attics and back alleys, without the commonest appurtenances of paraphernalia, is the one great uplifting force that is slowly but surely raising Italy to the light, and unfolding to her eyes the greatest glorious banner on which blaze the immortal words, liberty, equality, fraternity. These words, truthfully interpreted, mean to every man the right to a free conscience, to equality of justice and opportunity, and to recognition as a unit in the brotherhood of humanity. Italian Masonry does the great work without stages and scene settings, robes and regalias, electric lights or pipe organs. It sets in motion the almighty power of reason in the inculcation of the true philosophy of life, Freemasonry. The wealth and ease of a nation are its greatest dangers, unguarded liberty, then luxury, and in its wake the demon license. License is wedded to downfall and gives birth to despotism. As the ages roll on, this is the price mankind pays over and over again for its deification of the material, its worship of the golden calf. An exclusive surrender of Masonic instruction to a dramatic presentation of the rites and ceremonies would be an absolutely certain omen of the decadence of the order. Man shall not live by meat alone, but by every word that cometh forth of the oracles of true wisdom. The pretty performance which please the eye and the ear must not be allowed to supplant the inculcation of the greater philosophies which expand the immortal part of the nature of man. The scenic beauties, which moth and rust can corrupt, are not equivalent to the glory of the increased intellect, the inner sanctuary of the soul, into which no thieves can break through and steal. Freemasonry demands the emancipation of the human mind everywhere on earth. To this end, it is very necessary to denounce and warn against ultra-dramatic renditions of the ritual of the degrees to the exclusion, and possibly eventual suppression from noxious desuetude of the wonderful philosophy. Let wisdom and strength be the masters, and beauty the chaste handmaiden of the ceremonies. Let neither frivolous innovations nor foolish vanities detract from the majestic grandeur of the philosophical teachings of the rites. Let learning illumine and love uplift the minds of the novitiates to higher thoughts. Let no act mar nor jangle jar the susceptibilities of the initiates. Let it be the aim of all Masonic teachers to give knowledge rather than to please by the performance of a theatrical part. A masterful combination, the very best possible, of the dramatical and philosophical features of the degrees is what is to be most desired in the work of initiation. But this representation must be so effected that the philosophy remains always the paramount purpose. Sacrifice the drama every time, if necessary, to the philosophy. This principle firmly established in the bodies will accomplish in the highest sense the splendid mission of Freemasonry, and bring nearer the day when the universal brotherhood of man shall enter into the glorious peace of God, which passeth all understanding. A criticism. In the April number of the New Age, we published a letter from a Scottish Rite Mason which discussed the use of the stage in conferring the degrees. We have received the following letter, which, as it is evidently intended for the instruction of the brethren, we gladly print. George F. Moore, Editor, The New Age, Washington, D.C. Dear Sir, a letter of much interest appears in the April number of the New Age, containing the views of Codex regarding innovations in the clothing of the Rose Croix degrees. Misconceptions as to the symbolism of the chasuble and biretta, as used in the services of the Roman Catholic Church, are common. As a matter of fact, they have no historical religious meaning of any kind like that connected with the robe worn by the high priests of the Israelites. The casule or painula, from which the word chasuble is derived, was a larger outer garment worn by the Romans when on journeys to protect their usual clothing. Until the 6th or 7th century priests of the church wore the ordinary clothing of the country in which they lived, and how the chasuble came to find a place in the celebration of a mass, originally the dismissal of the catechumens, is only a matter of conjecture. The Romish Church has ever been ready to adapt itself to the costume, the customs, and even some of the ceremonies and superstitions of the various nations into which it has penetrated. Father Adam Shaw, one of the early Jesuits in China, is pictured in a mandarin's costume, with a compass in one hand, a timepiece in the other, and on his breastplate the representation of an eagle. The chasuble in the 18th degree is prescribed by the ritual, and as it is a garment with no claim whatever to particular religious significance, no valid objection could be raised to its use in Scottish Masonry. This applies equally to the biretta. The statement of Codex that slowly and insidiously this Jesuitism is cropping up again surely could not have referred to the sublime stage effects and the sublimer ritualism and ceremonial of our degrees. These are bulwarks of our strength in the labor of Scottish Masonry for the downfall of all tyranny, temporal or spiritual. We have more to fear from such carefully worded stories as the White Cross of Craig and the Holy Blood of Bruges in the April New Age. Here in truth lies something insidious. Let us not fall into the absurd position of becoming too tolerant of the intolerable. B. L. Tatman, Wise Master, St. Joseph Chapter No. 4, Knights Rose Croix. A very careful rereading of the story of the White Cross of Craig and the article The Holy Blood of Bruges has failed to reveal the slightest foundation for this criticism made by Brother Tatman. Editor.
Brother Francis H.E. O'Donnell, 32nd degree KCCH, and his thoughts on the philosophy and the drama in Freemasonry. And, Chris, I think you really hit it at the beginning when we were talking about this. This is not a quick read. This one requires a little bit of unpacking, so to speak. But I think he makes some good points, goes around the barn a little way to make it. But for me, it's sort of a look at how important is it to deliver Masonic degree work in a powerful and dramatic fashion. What is, and right. It's one of the many points he makes, but to me, that's the thing that I kind of hung up on. And I definitely have some thoughts on the idea. Where are you with this one?
Yeah. I mean, he starts the article by basically saying, there's this religious, there's the spirit, the mind, the body. We get it from the great architect of the universe. it manifests, and he says it manifests in the beginning through eyesight or through sight. And so as a young child, you're learning, you're educating yourself through sight. And then he says over time, as a baby or an infant, then you sort of evolve, and touch and feel and hear are also part of the senses that you're learning. It's a method by which you learn and educate. And so what he's saying is, start from there, right? So from the idea of a drama, or you're setting up a drama, or you're setting up the degrees, what's the important thing? It's sight. It's what is the candidate seeing? What is the candidate experiencing? And so he says that's really important. But he also sort of flips it towards halfway in the article, and he's like, look, who were, and so he uses this example of like the Grecian philosophers, and he says, yeah, that sight's really important. Of course, you can have a beautiful rendition of the Midsummer Night's Dream that's set up in this woodland, environment. You can have a beautiful play by Shakespeare. But what he's also saying is, yes, that's true, but at the same time, who were the more important figures in ancient Greek, in ancient Greece, for example? So he's saying the Grecian philosophers outranked the Greek actors and the Greek Olympians, because yeah, they were doing something physical, but at the same time, they were bringing philosophy into it. And so we know more about the philosophers than we do, we know about Plato, we know about Socrates more than we do about who won the first Olympic Games. He's talking about the philosophy that stands and sort of keeps or matures or endures. He then gets a little bit into, well, let's take into consideration the physical space, right? And you mentioned it before, Rich, which was really good. This idea of what's the time frame that he's writing this? 1904, turn of the century. You're starting to see the Scottish Rite build cathedrals, build these larger spaces. So what he's talking about is he's noticing a trend. We're moving away from, we're hanging out in taverns, and this guy who knows the ritual really well is going to sit there and perform it in front of you over a night. And he's talking about, we are putting on a production. We are getting costumes. We are building a large space to really bring this, these stories out and to get more out of it. And so he's saying, what are we losing? Is there anything that we are losing by doing this? Obviously, we're gaining a great visual, dramatic experience, but is the candidate going to remember that if you stand there and the practitioner basically is reading off of a book? Now, we can get into that, of course, but I'm going to stop there because I see
I think that you hit the nail again on the head, as I said before. To me, this is a little bit of a I don't want to use the term cautionary tale, but it's a point to brothers to be aware to use the new tools at their disposal properly. Right. And it's not unlike the discussion that we have currently regarding Masonry and, let's say, social media, because we recognize that we have this tool at our disposal, but we also recognize not only the advantages of it, but also the potential pitfalls that it may bring to us. And so I think at that time, what he's talking about is, as lodges, as Scottish Rite valleys, and as are starting to transition from that lodge room or that pub room space into that more stage-oriented space, to let's accentuate the positive, but be mindful of some of the negative things that it can bring. And I think that's a great discussion for Scottish Rite Masons in general. We tend to, there's some Scottish Rite valleys that are just huge and have these very ornate theaters. And a lot of the ones in the Midwest, Guthrie jumps to mind. The theater in Nashville is extraordinary. The temple in St. Louis is gorgeous. I mean, there's so many out there. But there's also something to be said for the power of these degrees in a very small space. And I come from a unique spot in that I belong to two valleys and perform the same degrees in both valleys. And one valley meets in a small lodge. And I mean, by small lodge, I mean it's a pretty small lodge room. You couldn't park more than 2 cars in the whole lodge room. And then I come from another valley. Baltimore has a beautiful large theater, and it's a classic Roman style theater with a well and all of those things. And I'd love to see Shakespeare done there someday as a Shakespeare nerd. But doing the 4th degree in both of those places and doing the 14th degree in both of those spaces, I understand the differences in the way the lessons are received by the brothers. I see there's certain advantages and disadvantages to each, but you know who has an even more unique perspective and a more recent perspective is Brother Matt, because he just went through part of his degrees in Susquehanna in a little tiny valley, and then went and saw the rest of them in Baltimore. So, and this was just as we're recording this just last week. So looking at that, Matt, did you like one more than the other? Was one more impactful to you than the other? I mean, I know sometimes reunion days can be a little long, and Chris knows this too. You have to endure the whole, endure several hours of that. That can be a little challenging, but what were your thoughts on this? Because the ink's not dry on your patent, for real. It's not.
Right.
I don't think the Grand Commander's even signed it yet, actually. I think.
Just from the aspect of, there's so much to take in at one time, it's a little bit of a sensory overload, in the smaller valley, the much smaller valley of Susquehanna, for the first 2 rounds of degrees. You certainly didn't have the theatrical end of things, and you had some costumes, but you didn't have the grander scale of what was going on in Baltimore. So I wouldn't necessarily say I didn't get as much out of the ones in Susquehanna as in Baltimore. They were just different. If the mess, and oddly enough, it kind of coincides with another project that I'm doing right now for the DMLA, but reading a chapter out of High Dad, and they talk about, the first time putting together their first set of degree work and all that, and how they realized that how it had to look, and the painstaking time that they took to make it look a certain way. I still feel like it was a little bit of sensory overload. Obviously, Baltimore looked better. It was bigger. It was grander. It was more theater. But Susquehanna still got its message across, and they still were able to convey the message well enough that I wasn't looking at my watch and falling asleep. It was, I'm sure next year when I go, because I've volunteered now for one of the degrees in Baltimore to be a part of that. So maybe, my take on it next year, or rather in the fall, will be way different than the first time out, because this time I'll be a part of it.
So Matt, you actually bring up a good point, which in the article they mention, and Donald is actually kind of a stickler about it. What he's saying is, you as a practitioner, so you said that, you volunteered, or you're interested in participating in the next conferral. What O'Donnell is saying here is, you may not be ready yet because you haven't gone through the educational, you're not fully in it, or you're not as experienced enough to go through it like a brother who has done it for 10 years or for 5 years who has learned it. Now, that might be just a criticism on O'Donnell's part, maybe in the context of, back then in 1904, there were 200 guys, and, there was there were 50 guys who were interested in performing it. And, they were looking for the more adept or more experienced guys. But what O'Donnell's saying is, yeah, you can do it, but the best practitioners, the best guys who are actually in the room doing the conferral work, those are the guys who've done it for a while. Those guys who learned it, who understand the ritual, who obviously, and this, we're talking about way past memorization. This is like, obviously they're memorized all their parts, but they understand the ritual. And so maybe in the context of the time, maybe you wouldn't have been a good candidate to be a practitioner, because he says you got to get the best people and you got to let them do it, because you're gonna minimize or not really enhance the initiatic experience.
Well, how do you not know that you have the best people until people volunteer and get involved?
Right. And again, we don't know the context of when he wrote this. We don't know was his valley just like 20 guys, or was it 150 guys who were every time there, they had different parts, they were alternating. So we don't really know the context there. And,
well, again, and I think, go ahead. I just to defend O'Donnell here a bit, I don't necessarily think it's an experience issue as much as it is an attitude and a self-education issue. And, and he's got a quote here too, actually, I want to mention. Freemasonry works to create an army of exemplars, not actors, soldiers of the light who by their everyday bearing in business, society, the family, unostentatiously depict the glory of the better life, the moral manhood amongst men. So what he's saying is, we need this army of actors, but you're not doing this as an actor. You're doing this to demonstrate to others in a confined space these lessons, but then you need to go out and actually live those lessons in order to really fulfill that. And it says the Masonic instructor who poses with platitudes and stained glass attitudes, principally to gain the applause of his brethren, will never create a favorable impression upon intelligent novitiates. So what he's saying is, this is not about acting. If you're doing this because you want to prove you're the best actor, you're doing it wrong. You have to do it because you have taken it upon yourself to incorporate these lessons, and you now want to demonstrate them in this confined space. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chris, but you were right in that spot where I was.
Yeah.
At that quote.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm more curious to hear. I mean, Matt, when you were going through the initiatic experience, could you tell? Oh yeah, these guys memorized it well. You can tell that they've done it 100 times. Or was it just, like your third degree or your first degree or the Blue Lodge degrees? Or you really couldn't tell,
Well, I thought the at least as far as the memorization and reciting work was done far better in the Blue Lodge degrees at my at the lodge that Maynard and I attend regularly. But it's something that they practice every week. I don't know what the brothers from Susquehanna and Baltimore, I don't know how often they get together to do that, or how often they're having to switch out people because this person's available for this, but this person's not available. I mean, for instance, I think it was the 25th degree, which I volunteered for, that wasn't able to be done this past Saturday because brother died.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So. But if I were to compare the brothers at our Blue Lodge, they knock it out of the park every time.
Yeah, I think there's and I'm using the term romance in the sort of old school term. I think there's this romance or this misconception of like, we're all in this tavern and everyone in this tavern is conferring this degree and it's part of this long traditional process of the 18th century that goes back to the 15th and 16th century. And you have this idea of like, it's an intimate space. And what it really, based on my research and certainly in the American context, it was probably one or two guys that really knew the entire part. Not everyone in that old revolutionary or colonial Masonic lodge had it down packed. There was one or two guys who served as the keepers of the ritual, and then they conferred it, and they were assisting and sitting down with the other guys and making sure that they get the ritual down. We really don't know how many people conferred all of those degrees, and obviously it varies by state, right? Who is participating in the degree conferral. So and in many of these cases, especially in these old colonial lodges, you've only got about 10 guys showing up. 3 or 4 of those 10 guys are traveling. They just got here to a different state. They don't know the ritual, or they know their own version of the ritual. So I think we're Masons have this grand vision of everyone was an expert on the ritual back then, and they can do it, perfectly. And they used to travel and confer these degrees, when in reality, parts of the degrees were only given. Certain parts were given. There's a great in a diary of Benjamin B. French in an old video that Maynard, you and I worked on. Even this guy who conferred the degrees on, the president of the United States, Andrew Johnson, he only read maybe 3 or 4 parts of 3 or 4 degrees. He didn't do the entire thing. So for McDonald to say, you need to really have these traditional, the way that we used to do it in the past, and now talking about how you need better practitioners. I think that's not correct. It's not accurate. It's not historically accurate. But at the same time, I think he is trying to push a vision of what he wants or what he suggests. He wants the best acting, the best experience by individuals who know the ritual for, so many years. And I think that's a little unrealistic. Now, is his intention to say, here's where we could be, here's the best part, here's where we should be striving to? Yes. Do I think it's realistic? Who knows? I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah,
he says in here, hang on, he says, there's a happy medium in everything. The picture living upon the stage or painted upon the wall is a useful accessory, but not indispensable to adjunct education. So, we need the scenery, but not absolutely. The dramatic representation of some of the degrees is extremely desirable when well done, but the philosophical significance must not be left to the imagination of the candidate. So, I think he's pushing for listen, we've got to get guys that know the ritual pretty well and are experienced in it, but also we can't have guys that just don't know how to act. We got to have that. Right. We got to find that space in the middle. And I think a lot of lodges do better at that now than perhaps they used to.
Yeah. There's a paragraph here that also struck me, because outside of that context, it's sort of like a little, again, critical. So he says Freemasonry is a philosophical fraternity. The endeavors of so-called reconstructors to convert the order to almsgiving, a beneficiary society, and in some countries to endow it with a political purpose are gross violations of the genuine spirit of the ancient institution. So he's like, we should be making Masons.
That's a fight that rages now. That's what's funny about the last article we worked on, and this article, is that there are so many things that, you erase a couple of dates and plop it down into some more modern language, and the issues are the same. So there are a lot of people who believe that, charitable works, which tend to be the focus of many lodges, or are the focus of many lodges, is not our main focus. And that's sort of a bastardization of Freemasonry in and of itself, that we are philosophers at heart, and that's what we should be. We should, as you said, make more Masons.
Right.
I'd be curious.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd be curious to know how off-putting he seems to be setting a pretty high standard for things. And I wonder how off-putting this article might have been taken back then, because, I mean, the drama end of things, you have to get someone's attention.
Yeah,
and that's where it all stems from. You again, you can't absorb it. It's like watching a movie. You don't always absorb everything from a film you see the first and only time you've seen it.
Right.
So at least if you've got someone's attention from the get-go with the drama and the stage and what have you, that's a good start.
Right. Yeah. And I think what he's, especially that last paragraph that we were just mentioning, I think what he's saying is, if your ritual isn't great, or if the initiatic experience isn't great, then maybe you should be focusing on that instead of setting up committees for charitable events or outdoor activities to get people in the room. Because what he's saying is you're failing at what he thinks is the principal aspect of Freemasonry, which is to make, to go through and make Masons and to improve their lives through philosophy and all these principles and values. So he's like, if you can't get that, then you're going to have a tough time doing everything else.
Do you remember the live action version of the Flintstones with John Goodman and Rosie O'Donnell, and I forget who played Wilma? I forgot. It was
half
Rick
of
Moranis was it Rick Moranis as
Rick Moranis was Barney Rubble, and
Barney Rubble. Thank you.
So
the Gen Xers have just left the chat. So
they have, yeah. So
or the
millennials have left the chat. Gen Xers are like Flintstones. That's a cartoon.
Yeah, that's right.
And the baby boomers. But the thing about that film that bugged me was that the Flintstones, the cartoon in of itself, always had a good storyline, and the dinosaurs and the TVs and the old tech, for lack of a better term, was just happened to be there. Whereas that movie, the story was terrible, and it was all about, look at all this cool stuff we build and made this cartoon come to life.
Right.
And so it loses you so quickly. Just as you mentioned, that O'Donnell in this article talks about how we need to be making Masons, and that should be our focus. Maybe we should get our ritual right before we start getting into charitable endeavors. He also, I think, is telling a tale of before you get too excited building giant set pieces, let's make sure you're getting the ritual right. So I think that's one of the central points of this is for sure is if you guys aren't getting the ritual and teaching the lessons, none of this other stuff matters at all.
Right.
So I know it's a strange analogy, but it just jumped to mind about a movie where like, look at all the cool stuff we built. Was that Flintstones movie?
Yeah. Well, I guess in that way, it's sort of like if you watch a TV show or a movie and you're like, this script is terrible, or the writing or the plot is terrible, and they're spending all their time on the CGI or graphics. To have that brother be in the room and be like, oh, it was a terrible movie. And then they go into the room and just read the ritual from the book. And it's like, hey, don't you see what you're trying to say here? It's the same thing. But you're saying, oh, this movie's terrible because it's not well written. But then you decide, well, I don't have time. I'm just going to read this from the book. What does that candidate go through? What experience do they see?
So Brother O'Donnell makes some great and interesting points, and we'd love for you to share if you have any thoughts with us. You can always email us at podcast@scottishrite.org. Final thoughts on this one. Let's start with Brother Matt Bowers, now 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. KCC. No, you're not KCCH.
No.
Cut that out. Editor. Yes. Cut that out. Brother Matt Bowers, now 32nd degree Master of the Royal Secret. Final thoughts on this one?
Just personally speaking, I didn't like it as much as the previous article. I think he sets pretty high standards for things. And again, you can't get all, you don't get the message the first time out. If you reel them in with a good performance, then the next time through, hopefully that they attend, they get more of the information out of it, or they look up the information in any of the books that are out there.
I understand what you're saying. I don't dislike the article, and I don't disagree with per se much of what Brother O'Donnell says in the article. I feel a little like he's looking down the bridge of his nose at us, like he's lowering his glasses and kind of giving us a warning without trying. He's got that old past master vibe about it, is what it amounts to. His arms are crossed and saying, hey kid, make sure you put that where it doesn't belong in the ritual. Make sure. So there's a little bit of that to it, which can always rub me the wrong way, but I can't argue with it. And what fascinates me about this, as in a lot of the other readings that we've done, is how the problems have not changed. The language has changed, but overall the problems remain. Where is our focus? Are we, should we focus more on ritual or more on charitable stuff? Should we focus more on making sure we deliver these things word for word, or delivering them in a powerful manner? And so it fascinates me how the problems don't change. They just roll right along. And is that just because that's just the way life is, or are we repeatedly not learning a lesson, or what is it? But it's very, very, very fascinating to me. Brother Chris Ruli, you get the last word on this one.
Yeah, I selected this article for our discussion because just like you said, out of context or out of time, you can place this in 1950, you can place this in 1850, and the theories and the topic is just that. I hope it brings up more interesting conversations with your Masonic body. So if you're listening to this, consider sharing it with others and see what they think about it. I think the best types of articles, especially through the New Age and in that earlier generation of the New Age, are questions that are not yes or no answers. They're sort of allow you to sit back and go, well, wait a minute. As a past master of my lodge, I've had XYZ, or as a new guy, here's what I think. It allows you to have deeper discussion and to find ways where you can either come together or improve your lodge. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Rich.
Amen. Amen to that. And I think that if you'd like to use this in a piece of lodge education, one suggestion is, email a link to a bunch of the brothers in your lodge. And then that night, maybe repeat a little bit of it and then have that discussion in open lodge. Don't be afraid of those discussions, as long as your Grand Lodge allows that type of thing. And really enjoy the discussion with your brothers, because I think one of the things, and I know we were trying to wrap, but and I think Chris will agree with me on this. I know Matt will. Lodges have their own culture, and one of the best things your lodge can do to grow, and whether we're talking about a lodge or a valley and a lodge perfection or a chapter Rose Quarry, whatever the body is you're talking about, is if you come to understand what the particular culture of your lodge is and what you guys really want to be focused on. When you find that out and you can all start rowing in the same direction, your lodge is just going to grow in energy and spirit very, very quickly, because people will want to be a part of that. That energy becomes very infectious. And so, take this in, have that discussion. What's more important to your lodge, doing these charitable things in the community, or, hey, no, we need to get this ritual right? And your lodge culture may lean one way or another. And if you can figure out what that is, and you're part of the team helping to make that develop and grow, I think that it really could, help lead to a much more fruitful lodge experience for a lot of people. I don't know if you agree or disagree with the idea of lodge culture there, Chris, but I really think it's a big deal.
I think lodge culture saves or breaks lodges. If the lodge can't come together as a group of people to figure out what its goals are, then I think there's some big issues there. And having a lot of different opinions, a lot of people from different backgrounds, I think the more diverse you can make it to make sure that you get all points involved, I think the better that kind of lodge culture becomes.
Matt, now you get the last word on this one, and then we wrap up, I promise.
The true last word.
True last word. Not just lodges, anything. Your business, your relationship with anything. If there's no solid, if the culture's not solid, it's a backbreaker. Right. You will never get anything accomplished. You'll spend more time arguing than you will solving.
Love for you to share your thoughts with us. If you're listening, podcast at scottishrite.org is the easiest way to email us. Also in YouTube or Spotify comments, however you listen to it. And please make sure you check out all of our other offerings on YouTube. You'll find myself and Brother Chris quite often kicking things around. We've also got the Scottish Rite Journal podcast that Brother Matt voices each and every week. And it's quick, and who has time to read sometimes? I know with kids and job and lodge, and reading's tough, but you got to drive places, you got to mow the lawn. So listen to it then, just like you're listening to this podcast now. And we do hope that you will share it with some of our brothers and share your ideas and thoughts with us. And we keep digging into that new age, which is the predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal, which was so artfully digitized by Brother Chris Ruli, and allows us to have these discussions. So thank you all for listening. Brother Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Brother Matt, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll catch you next time right here on the New Age Masonic Podcast.